Conventions. A place to get away from school, work, and whatever else, and not have to worry about much of anything in real life. If you're an attendee, at least. Being a game developer at a booth is like being a musician on tour. Huge crowds, exhausting process. I was at PAX South last weekend showing off Negative World in the Rising booth at the last moment. Full disclosure though, I've exhibited with other companies before in the past and showed off at local shows, so it's not my first rodeo, but I've actually wanted to make a postmortem on this topic since I saw a wonderful GDC talk by those awesome guys, the developers of Move or Die. Just never found the right opportunity. So it's less of a what to do as an exhibitor conventions guide, watch the GDC talk for that one, as it is more of a way to catalog what went right and what went wrong, and hopefully using said information for future shows, and hopefully others find it helpful too. Let's dive right in. Not all games are created equal on the show floor. Story-driven games have a tough time hooking players because of all the white noise, while at the same time UI-heavy games like strategy games tend to be pretty intimidating for players trying them out, especially in cases where people are watching too. Not to mention people have a very different way of playing games during a convention. Players tend to rush in and seemingly not notice what they just did until a second and a half after they did it. In the case of Negative World, it was a very straightforward art style, negative space with no grayscale, and almost designed like an Atari game, move and jump being the primary actions. Having a simple to play, visually simple game will make it easier for people to give it a chance, especially if the game has a really good gimmick. This isn't to say that it's a work-all template. Other more detailed and more complex games find success on convention floors all the time. It's just a matter of aesthetics and how clear the premise is. PAX loves their pins. PAX really loves their pins. Without sounding too much like a cold business person, it's free advertising. People pick up pins, their friends or others ask about said pins, they explain, and they come back to see what the hubbub was about. More often than not, I heard they came to the booth because their friends told them about it and they were curious. So again, free advertising. For show purposes, I added a timer to Negative World. Initially, I never thought of adding a timer feature in a game that rewards players for taking their time as they make their next move. I never thought people would like it seemed like a giant contradiction. Until I saw the aforementioned GDC video as the Move or Die devs shared how they got players involved in some way. Adding a timer was simple enough, and I actually wanted to see if this works or not. And oh boy did it pay off. Had at least 3 or 4 groups of the same people coming back to optimize their runs and watching others play and form strategies with each other. And the more people crowding around, the more likely people are going to turn their heads and see what the attraction is. So, win-win. And because of the positive response, I've decided to implement the timer feature into a later patch. One timer for individual levels and a timer for world runs. No concrete release date on the patch at the time of writing. I hate to sound like an executive when talking about, let's say, the less artistic side of things, but for all intents and purposes, when at a booth, you're trying to sell your game, or yourself if you want to be pedantic about it, which means playing salesperson. Most players have a window of interest lasting around 1 to 2 seconds before moving on. When staring at a screen for over 2 seconds, I'd give them the usual pitch, give a call to action for pins and flyers, more on merch later. There's a better chance of people checking it out or even trying it when sliding in the salesperson talk. Running your booth requires a lot. Preparation, building, organizing, and for this point, talking a lot. People are going to be asking questions, and developers put on the salesperson face, and voice stamina isn't boundless. Bring water beforehand, it mitigates voice cracking. That's it for positives. Let's get to the other half people wanted to see. One of the worst aspects of boothing, aside from someone triggering a game-breaking bug, which thankfully didn't happen, is trying to make it through the weekend. For context, I was selected to be in the PAX Rising booth. Think of it as the Indie Mega booth or the Indie Game Arena booth, but for smaller, more lower-tier indies. And there were no chairs or stools. Depending on convention standards, chairs will or will not be provided or even allowed for certain booths. Shoes with comfy soles are a good choice to mitigate exhaustion, or the more preferred choice, bring someone with you to cycle shifts with. I didn't have either of those luxuries. The first part was because I didn't consider it, and the other part because, again, this was last minute, so people already had plans. This also handicaps the ability to network and make connections with other devs, goes without saying. I started with something like over 100 flyers or so. Now I have none. I started with this many pins. Now I have this much. Going back to salesperson talk, if certain pieces of merch is no longer available or in low supply, information is going to get lost. In this case, it was the link to the official company Discord server, plug. In hindsight though, that's not much of a loss considering the new user to flyer ratio is a few days out from the convention. Live and learn, I guess. Speaking of which, Email signatures. Probably not the best in a convention space. People are overwhelmed with choices of games to play and people to see. If they're asked to take a pin or a flyer and then asked for a signature, it's probably close to trying their patience a little bit. To be honest, I'm still learning the best way to pitch email newsletter signatures. They seem to work best in a local space. Now looking at this point, it may not seem much of a con, but it does turn into a hassle packing up, assembling, dismantling, and then heading back. For context, I scrambled to get materials I thought would be necessary. Cardboard, Velcro, banner, cloth, pins, flyers, cards, etc. Stuff I'll use in future shows, definitely, but there is such a thing as over-design. In PAX Rising's case, they already provided posters with specifications in mind, so I didn't end up using the cardboard. The message was already clear as day. This is a small con, but a con nonetheless. During the demo, there are 2 block levels. When I was making them, it was to break up the monotony and give players' minds a breather from these Switch platforms. But they were definitely the slowest and the least interesting bits of the demo. The part that grabbed people the most were the Switch platforms, since they were dependent on the player jump count and the platform's math condition. And you better believe I was sick of explaining that by the end of the convention. When people caught players playing the pushable block levels, their attention span was even shorter. Again, it's a small point, but it's a still significant point nonetheless. It's a misconception that conventions equal more sales, but conventions are a different kind of investment. It's more of a place to meet, network, and make connections. As exhibiting games go, it's a learning process. Like any skill or discipline, it takes time. Only in this case, it takes a significant amount of money to get a booth too. And there's always so much you can learn from showing at local shows, if there are any at all, depending on locations. Regardless, it's always a milestone when showing off a commercially shipped game with a homegrown company at a convention. That'll be it for this video. As usual, let me know if you have any questions or feedback. Take care of yourselves and have a good week, or month, or whenever the next video comes out. Either way, take care of yourselves.